Hello there, product people. Welcome to the show that supercharges your abilities to become better thinkers, makers, and leaders. I'm your host, Alsawi, and I'm thrilled to have you join me for this exciting episode of Product People. In this episode, we explore how a child's creativity can impact their professional career. We discuss the influence of generative AI on design, how to bridge the gap between design and development using AI, and the evolution of design education. We also cover prompt-based design, the role of UI helper agents, the importance of humanism, and the current job market for UX professionals. So if you're a designer, product manager, software engineer, or simply someone interested in understanding the impact of AI on design, you're in the right place. As always, you can expect an open conversation, valuable insights, and meaningful advice that can fuel your own journey with product, design, and leadership. Let's dive right in. Today, I'm joined by a design practitioner, consultant, professor, and data literacy expert. He's been an active UX practitioner in the San Francisco Bay Area for the last 20 years. Currently, he's part of the consultancy Gauge, specializing in user-centered research and design practices. His clients have included organizations such as Electronic Arts, Adobe, Airbnb, and the Gates Foundation. He's also a professor of data literacy and visualization in the Design Strategy MBA program at his alma mater, California College of the Arts. Fun fact, he can often be found before dawn in a rowing crew trying to think of new metaphors for corporate stagnation. Without further ado, let's welcome Nick Cawthon to the Product People podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, good morning, Elsawi. Thanks for having me.
Well, to begin, I always like to start by hearing my guest's personal story. So I'd love to hear yours, especially as it relates to design. Walk us through your journey. How did you get started? And perhaps how have you evolved to where you are today?
Thank you. I'll take you way back. I'll take you back to the mid-1980s, where I was in an aftercare program. You and I both are parents. One of these days, I was sitting at a table where some of the den moms gave us rambunctious little kids some pens and some paper, and we all sat down to draw for about an hour. And I remember after that hour was done, I looked at what I drew. It was a dogfight of World War II airplanes, something I was into at the time. And I looked around and I saw that the kids next to me didn't take the activity as seriously as I did, or have the investment or perhaps the talent to come up with a composition. And it was one of the early sort of affirming moments of, oh, this is something you liked doing. This is something that you feel as if you're good at. And there were a couple other moments like that as I got to college. I got led into a visual design class full of upperclassmen. And it was the very first day of my very first week of freshman year. And I remember throwing myself into that first assignment to a level of investment, emotionally and physically, to the point where, it was very clear that this was something that I wanted to do. The ability to sustain that over the course of the semester, that maturity wasn't quite there yet. But for a brief shining moment, I was the king of the world. And, those are sort of points that I consider myself very fortunate to have reflection on. This is something you enjoy doing, and this is something that you're good at. And I hope that everybody in our lives has that same kind of internal dialogue that we can see and guide ourselves to get to the point where we are today. And I don't feel as if I ever left that table in the aftercare program. I feel as if I'm still sitting down with my pen and my pencil, trying to figure out what goes on the page. Now, the medium of that page has changed dramatically in the last 40 years, where now we are dealing with abstractions and interpretations of what is art, what is communication, what is research. And that is something that is always extremely interesting to me, of how we begin to process that evolution and that change.
It's a really great segue into my next question. Given your story, in the last 3 to 5 years, things changed dramatically with generative AI being spoken about, being hyped about. But I want to hear from you, specifically thinking about the last 5 years or so. How do you think design changed? And I'm using the word design loosely, but how do you think design as a field changed?
I would always like to call out the time mark of when AI gets mentioned in a podcast. And I think we were at about 4.5 minutes, which sets a new record, El Sawi, for you and I, is that we're going to jump quickly into AI because you're right. It is changing everything. The number of applications and the breadth across industries of which is seeing change. It was one thing that wasn't anticipated 5 years ago, is the breadth of which generative technology would be applicable towards. Every industry and every job, at least in professional circles, has to see impact of it. If I might rewind us to maybe 10 or 15 years ago when we were talking about digital transformation. Do you remember that buzzword where we were going from, pen and paper process to now digital process? And that was something that consultancies banked on for years and are still selling. And so I see it as the next version of that is this examination of process. Now, it's easy for those who are not as familiar with the advantages or the integrations or the implementation of generative tools, is to think that everything that you do with a computer is AI. Everything that a calculator even can generate numbers out at a speed that humans are not able to comprehend. It really behooves us as practitioners to understand where in our industries, in our applications, it's most relevant. And you asked about design. I'm going to use design with the lowercase d as opposed to an uppercase d. There are many who speak of this very much as a craft as opposed to a tool. Design as this silo or sanctity where it's this applied art of which has an outcome that is very different than I view it. I see a design as a glue almost in between different departments. I have had a project in the last 3-4 months where we've stopped and started over the first couple months of it going through tools at a high rate of speed. I brought on a junior practitioner from my alma mater who thought that she'd be going and using Figma and doing design comps. But the client that I had is a returning one. And our engagement just at the end of COVID 2 or 3 years ago was as such. When we delivered our comps to the development team, we sort of wiped our hands and we said, good luck. And this is all the requirements and these are all the workflows. And we put these in front of people and they said, yes, this is going to be wonderful. And we had the luxury or the curse to come back 2 years later and see, how did it go? How was the build? As an external contractor, sometimes you can't sit alongside of them. You have to do your job and move on to another contract. And the gap between design and development was so severe that this time around, I pledged not to repeat that mistake because it looks horrible on us that we designed something that the internal team wasn't able to build. And so that led us to examining their process a little bit better. Okay, they have a code repository. They've got design components that they've already built. They've got versions and infrastructure already in place. How do we as designers work in those worlds? We need to learn how to understand version control systems. We need to be able to iterate on the components that are already in place. We need to refactor when they change form libraries that we can go into anything that we're building and follow along with the changes they've made from an infrastructure perspective. Those aren't things that the designers traditionally do. But in the case of this project, we went from traditional design tools like Figma and we said, okay, well, the plugins don't work with Storybook. The plugins with GitHub, they don't have the ability to nest and manipulate components because all of our design patterns and code component libraries teach us to use the colors that are already there, not to create new crayons. Moving on to UXPin, which has a little bit more integration, but it is still not seamless, where you're not pulling from and pushing to repositories that see active change. Moving on to Vercel, trying V0 as a generative tool, which uses all sorts of metaphors of version control systems, but it lives in a silo and does not have the ability to integrate or catch up to speed with the existing component library. And so every 2 weeks, we're just burning through tools because we want to be in step with the process already in place. And so the last couple months have been in Cursor, using a React framework, understanding the rules and how to set parameters in place to be able to build from their components as well as create some of our own. And the level of control over what I'm selling as a prototype, this is sort of your industry insider knowledge. We're selling this as a UX prototype, but we're building this with the same front end and the same components that the development team is already using. And in the last 2 weeks, this handoff has been slow and gradual to say, we've taken weeks, if not months, of development time off your plate by building all the validation, the error states, the manifests, the conditional logic into this application. The external references of data sets are all built into this quote prototype. So when the handoff occurs, the work you're going to have to do to interpret what the experience is going to be minimal. I say that not having to handle it, but to go back to it, the long-winded start of this story, the reduction of the gap between design and development is where these generative tools have really succeeded.
I love that conclusion at the end. This kind of gap was notoriously difficult throughout, maybe the last 10 years or so. But it seems like from your story, the answer is kind of there, but I wouldn't say, from what I heard from you and what I'm also seeing, that it's a universal method that everybody can apply. In fact, you kind of hear about these kind of extremes where you see so-called experts on LinkedIn and other platforms saying coding is dead. And these kind of statements that are kind of provocative in nature.
Yeah.
And you see others that are complete, I don't want to say deniers, but they're completely against the idea of any sort of role that AI can play when it comes to design. So I'd love maybe to take what you said about that reduction of the gap between design and development and build on it. And I want to hear your thoughts about the perspectives of designers concerning AI and its impact. Where do you see that given your work with other designers?
Yeah, I think our algorithms are saying similar things, for better or for worse. I'm seeing that design is dead and Figma is dead, just because those are the people I follow, and those are the provocative statements, as you mentioned, that people are getting the most clicks or eyeballs from. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Design is not dead. Design is just having to change and adapt like it always has. The notion of where that role is that it's going to be a tool that enhances but doesn't replace designers. And this is going back to Dylan Field had an interview with Y Combinator, sort of the future of design. And having been through these cycles enough to know that this is just another tool. I used to build prototypes in PowerPoint because Visual Basic would allow you to have interactive elements. And moving on to some of the tools like Axure that was bringing jQuery libraries, and then the befuddling of Sketch and InVision and all these tools that would eat itself. It was Figma is not the first player in this game. It just happened to catch an uplift of a really good tool that thought about things differently. How they adapt, interesting to me. Are they going to be able to truly embrace designers' ability to learn new skills? As I look at sort of my teaching coming up in the fall, I need to tear everything down and build it back up again, because the way we talk about designers' roles and designers' involvement in organizations, product development organizations, I think it's going to change drastically. We cannot keep ourselves in silos as much as we have. The ability to be able to play well with others is going to be paramount, as opposed to maybe the aesthetic or the more visual advantages of designers. I don't believe it's dead. I don't believe coding is dead in any way. It just got a lot easier and faster. Going back to this project I was just describing, I was fortunate enough to have a relationship with a front-end developer over the last 10, 15 years. And I've asked him to give us 5 to 10 hours a week of his time as this other designer and I try to figure out what it means to design a front-end code base through prompts, because we know we're going to get stuck and there's going to be merge conflicts, a need to rebase and a need to refactor, and setting these parameters of the build and the environment variables, and all of the routing that goes into different endpoints and calling resources. Like, we don't know that. We're used to design variables and working within those kinds of parameters. And so that influence and that role between design development is it's kind of a reflection of the last question, of that gap is reducing more and more, where we're now playing in each other's spaces and living in each other's worlds. So that's something that I see. It may not be dead, but it certainly is changing.
Thank you for that. I like what you said about how the need to work with others is going to be even more important, and the need for collaboration, but it's a highly orchestrated collaboration. Yeah. It's no longer a luxury. It's no longer optional, but becomes critical. With that, I think it helps take me to this question of, how do I become a better designer? There's always this debate around things like certification, tools. I get some people asking, "Oh, what's the newest tool that I need to learn?" Or I'm really proficient in this tool, but I need to be certified in this framework. And it's true not only for designers, but I also see it for product people in general, other disciplines that also build products. So this question of like tool mastery as a competitive advantage for hireability, certification, and really coming down to how can I be a better designer?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this?
It's a great question to ask, but to sort of hand wave and say that, well, this is one guiding principle, which will not stop me from hand waving and saying this is some sort of guiding principle. But it really depends on the organization. If you're going into a large organization, you don't have that kind of adaptability to maybe span in between departments and play outside of your boundaries. But for somebody such as I, who really each project is an interpretation, the one thing that I've found is this adaptability into areas that we're not very comfortable in, that designers wouldn't traditionally be asked. We've had this ongoing debate for the past 25 years of should designers know how to code? And it is the most inane philosophical discussion. And I roll my eyes every single time because it is, you're suggesting, should I not be curious? If I work in digital product design, should I not be curious of how this actually gets made? And the notion that, no, you just stay in your world and you concentrate on the aesthetics and you understand pattern libraries and systems design and just leave that to somebody else. I had a great professor that once told me that specialization was for insects. And I've taken that to heart, is that this need to understand the next step in the line, as well as the previous step, where if we look at, again, I'm using design with a capital D in some of these sentences, but you would never find a designer today asking, should I learn how to do qualitative research? Should I learn to understand what factor analysis and product segmentation is? Should I be adept at behavioral sciences so that I can author a survey? Like that's not something that a designer would ever ask, because over the last 10, 15 years, it's been paramount that you understand the requirements that go into effect design. I think the opposite is true with forward thinking about where does this go, and understanding of all those things that I mentioned around front-end code development, because it couldn't be easier now to see the implementation as that algorithm starts to process your prompt. I mean, you're not writing it, but you should certainly be paying attention to it. And so I'll go back to the original question of what's to be learned. We should understand what's going on with this algorithm. It's so easy to just take it for what it's worth, but it is not perfect. It is something that is taking a lot of assumptions and never admits fault, and is resoundingly, it reminds me of a politician in some ways, just resoundingly overconfident in its ability to execute. But there is a paper trail, and you are watching it move from component to component and do these things, and the inconsistencies, and understanding the way to get it to work within the parameters that you want it to. And so to replace the question of should designers learn how to code, I would say, should designers learn how to prompt and use these kinds of tools to their advantage so that they can be more efficient and produce better artifacts?
My takeaways as I was putting my notes down was really around focusing as much as possible on what I need to build as a designer, but also where does my design go? So that was one element, learning how to prompt. And I really like the metaphor around thinking of generative AI as another politician that you're speaking to. So
don't trust it. Like a trust but verify. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And Elsawi, I will admit that it's only been in the last couple months that this has all made sense. The application of generative tools has really sort of been an epiphany in the development of this specific prototype on this specific project. In the Bay Area, we see a lot of hype cycles. There are people that want to raise money, and there's this groupthink and buzzwords that we saw it with blockchain, we saw it with NFTs, we saw it with digital transformation back in the day. Every 6 to 12 months, there's just a different wave of marketing around tech-related buzzwords. And AI was one of those. And it was hard to discern, was this something that was for real? Especially given what we do can be kind of nuanced and niche and not necessarily applicable to, say, blockchain. That hasn't changed, or Web 2.0. That hasn't changed my life. But the efficiency that is gained from the tools that I'm seeing coming onto the market are really amazing. I was reached out to by an agency outside of North America that offered a free website if I was able to engage with them, if I was able to talk with them. They would just give me a free website because of generative tools like Lovable or some of these other ones where you can just boop, there it is. It really, for those who are coming into the field now, that kind of rapid change is going to be really require flexibility and understanding of where the value is, because it's not so much in the aesthetic any longer. We've seen consolidation with design pattern libraries. It happened earlier on with Google's Project Kennedy, where everything standardized to a specific material design. Apple had its equivalent. These pattern libraries were after the first wave of iPhone and Android apps, where every designer was making their own front end and their own aesthetic of skeuomorphism, where I think these tech companies saw a diminishing brand value, where with every app you open up, there are different UI patterns and metaphors that are going on. It made for a poor experience of the end user. And so not only internally amongst their own internal applications, but also showcasing these for third-party developers to say, you don't have to rewrite everything. You can use these patterns. That introduced with a global freelancing workforce to say that we can do, quote, design better, faster, cheaper than the precious few that called themselves web designers at the turn of the century. It's like now that whole concept of design as this visual artifact is really getting called into question, and it reduces the gap between design and development. And for people who come from a product background, it reduces our gap as well, is that we are all very sharing the same space of guidance and strategy of how this experience is supposed to be.
Where I would love to go next, just building on that even more, is the future. If you kind of reflect on what's going on, and if you were to wish for anything in the field of user experience, in the field of design, what would it be and why?
The future, El Sawi. We're already here. The future is here. It's just on the fringes. So what do we see on the fringes of our space? Agents. There are agents that will click and browse and fill out websites on your behalf. And I hearken back to 2008, 2009, when we were used to designing and programming for a browser screen, 640 by 480, I think. Then it went up to 1280 and on and on and on. We had this concept of browser-based interactions. And in 2008, the ubiquity of mobile devices caused a rethinking of patterns, implementation, delivery methods. And that's where it's been ever since. Like mobile first has been proven. And now we are looking at a world in which human beings clicking on buttons on either phones or browsers are going to be something that is not a totality. It's going to be decreasing its percentage over the next years and decades. And in its place, just as we saw with APIs and internal services and Zapier and integrations between applications, we are going to be looking at agents. And what does it mean to design for an algorithm versus to design for a human being? And I'm not going to begin to know that answer, but it certainly does reduce things down to most simplest form. And there may be delight in that, where how can you express humanism or a humanistic element to a product design when everything else is, meant for the machine? So that's what I think about when I stare at the ceiling at night. Is it just that our agents are talking to one another, or are we still designing for humans anymore?
Mm-hmm. So with this idea of extreme efficiency, do you think there will be an impact on how we apply empathy?
Yeah, certainly. It's hard to empathize for an algorithm that hits a barrier or a sort of hurdle in its workflow that doesn't scream humanistic qualities. employees. Going back to the metaphor of designing for mobile, we didn't have a whole lot of empathy for those on mobile devices. It just became a business need because it was a growing segment of the population. One of the artifacts of mobile first, or the reduction of these subjective designs or design heavy and Photoshop designed interfaces, where we're now really working with basic elements. The speed increases, the legibility increases, the accessibility increases. Screen readers have a lot easier time of processing when we're using standard tools like design libraries. And that empathy of who and how they're using it, I think, has to come at the beginning. It is going to be a differentiator for product managers to build these into requirements. I say that with an uptick at the end of the sentence because it's not a given. I tend to flow through a lot of relationships with PMs, and some get it, and some allow time for it and build it into the process, and others don't. If we can get that kind of velocity, the empathy is allowing us to slow down and ask, are we doing the right thing? Of that sort of expansive thought, are we addressing the right needs for the people that we're developing this for? And so it, hearkening back to a popular book title, it's Thinking Fast and Slow. Our fast has gotten a lot faster, but we also need to make sure that we slow and reflect and understand those requirements and those needs with a humanistic lens.
It's very interesting. Thank you for that. All right, we're going to take a short break. And when we're back, I'll ask you about what's going on around the world and what do you believe the role of product professionals in the context of what's happening. Hey there, my amazing product people. If you're trying to find your own story with product, design, and leadership, gain a new perspective on being human in a soulless corporate world, and possibly have a good laugh in the process, you can grab your very own copy of my latest book, Product People, A Journal of Laughter and Tears. It's available on Amazon in all formats right now. Happy reading. All right, and we're back. And I wanted to kind of take a bit of a side tour, but it's not too disconnected from our discussion. It actually builds on top of some of the things we discussed earlier. What's your take on what's going on around the world? There's lots of events happening, I'm sure domestically and internationally. People finding it harder in general, product professionals finding it harder to understand their roles. And what do you kind of make of all this, and what do you believe is the role of us as product people in this context? What role do we play?
Yeah, thanks, Alsawi. And looking at your background, you've had this great exposure globally. Companies of different sizes and shapes and different locations. You've been on both agency side and client side. You've had this very eclectic background. And I'm really eager to hear what your reactions are to my small slice of life in this West Coast of the United States. What is happening? Change is happening at a really fast pace right now. And I think that can be very unnerving to people. I will sort of try not to toe too much into politics because I think there's no good outcome there. But I can tell you that one of the most challenging parts of my role as a business owner is working with the federal government. The systems in place and the experiences they provide in order to, quote, do business with them is extremely difficult, to the point where I need to find somebody on a contract basis to facilitate that taxes and bookkeeping and accounting and payroll and loans and all of the things that I engage with our government here. And so when somebody comes and says, I'm going to tear all of this down and build all of this back up, now part of me says, good, like it needs it. Now, you asked about empathy earlier on, and I think that what is currently being done doesn't show a lot of empathy or transparency for that matter. And maybe they're doing it because they know they only have a short amount of time. And I think that's one thing that we've been seeing over the last couple weeks of, we need you to wrap this up by the end of May because your government efficiency is causing some shockwaves in town halls all across America. But I would do the same thing. I would look at the processes in place. This is experience mapping. This is customer journey blueprints of like, okay, see what they do is they take this printed form and they put it in an envelope and they put a stamp on it and they mail it
Hmm.
in and we get it and then we process it and then we scan it and then we type in no, you just need to build a web form. The self-examination of how we're doing things at a federal level is decades overdue. They missed the whole digital transformation wave, and now it's being brought to the forefront. And hopefully, they're using tools that are modern. And I don't doubt for a second that team, who I will try not to mention in name or acronym, is examining the processes in place and saying there's a much better way to do this. And again, all the job losses and the sort of default to fire somebody and then hire them back later if you realize you made a mistake are all 100% wrong. There is no empathy or even just admittance of error. It's just shoot first and ask questions later. And so that is wrong. But I'm hoping that in 20 years' time, we can look back and say, at least we got to be able to vote with the mobile phone, or we got to pay our taxes in a different manner because we couldn't accept the status quo anymore. So that's sort of what's happening locally here. Globally, I had my first, and Elsawi, I'm going to relate this back to product. I've had my first client that had a offshore product manager. And that's something that designers have been seeing for a while, but I've never seen it in terms of product, where there was a US based company that found both a development as well as a PM team in an Eastern European country. And that's been a day-to-day contact for me, who is authoring requirements documents and doing reviews and translating these over into development specs. And so that globalization is coming for everybody. It is something that has taken some getting used to because, living in San Francisco, we are expensive and we need to show value and to feel the pressure of, well, you can find a designer who can do the same work you can for a third of the price has always been, especially as I advance in my career, something that is worth understanding what impact that has towards my business. And so I'm seeing the same thing in product as well. And it's been that way for engineering forever. But slowly, the more and more strategic a position, the less American businesses see need to pay the premium of American employees. And, that might be going into all of this sort of nativism that we're seeing in a political climate. But that's how I relate it back to tech and our conversation here today.
Thank you. All right. So let's talk about the job market. I mean, we've been talking about everything from a bit of politics to the design to development gap to collaborating to the federal government and your story that started on that day when you had that art activity. Let's bring it together as we kind of reflect on all of this and think about how do you see the job market now, especially for product people, in light of all of these changes, in light of everything that's happening? And what is your advice for people out there that are perhaps struggling with the cost of living, with finding themselves in light of everything that's going on?
I think if we could find a theme or an encapsulation of our conversation, Elsawi, it's sort of relating it back to the humanist. I know it's easy to be dazzled by the magic of AI, purple icons of sparkly magic wands. It seems like every company has the same sparkly icon to suggest this is all magic. But don't forget, humans trained these LLMs. Like, we didn't just run it through an algorithm. We had to guide it to this certain place. And to look at the job market, one of the things that was so important to me in my 20s was a community. And back then, in my day, we would get together in real life. We would get together to date one another, to find out who got fired and who got hired. We had this need to band together emotionally because nobody knew what they were doing. This was also at the advent of the web, and this web thing was all brand new. And so there's similarity here where, and I see what you're doing in your collectives and your education groups is that you're providing a framework for people to connect with one another. And I think biggest killer is isolation. And I mean that in all aspects of our lives, both professionally and personally, is that when you feel as if you're isolated and alone, and it is so easy, especially post-COVID, to sit behind that keyboard and feel like you're not isolated. But in fact, the vulnerability that we express when talking talking with people one-on-one is so very much different than what can be misconstrued from a Discord chat or even a text message. And so, I covered earlier the need for adaptability. And if I were this 9-year-old in the aftercare program, and the teacher would say, this drawing is wonderful, but let's see how it translates into ceramics. Or how would you feel about taking this and turning it into performance art? Little Nick, can you give me a dance that is a dog interpretation of a dog bite? And to say that, our inner voice of wanting to communicate visually or wanting to be involved in product design and development does not have to stay constrained to one medium. It can be used in many tools. We can be the connection to the research and to the humans that are giving us feedback. We can be the whisper to the developers that are needing to understand these code components and how we're trying to use them in patterns, and when do we need to create a unique element or a nuance because it does offer this kind of interaction for the end user. And so that's, to recap here, coming into that job market, I'm feeling the same things coming out of the job market, is that we should be emphasizing and prioritizing human connections and the creation of community. If you don't like the community out there in whatever town, whether it be Toronto or San Francisco that you're in, go and create your own and find the groups of people that you want to talk to, whether it be design with a capital D or design with a lowercase d, because it's going to be so important to you as you find your niche and you find your sweet spot and you find your industry and your size of company and the language that you like to speak in. That's going to set you up for years, if not decades, of professional growth.
Yeah, I think it's often overlooked, that element of loneliness and joining a community and sharing ideas and sharing experiences and the level of empathy that one builds with that. I think that's critical. And it kind of brings a lot of the other discussions around the changes, around the impact of AI. It brings it all together. If we were to put that empathy into perspective and into practice, get from your perspective a cause, a topic, or an issue that you're passionate about and you would like to share with our audience.
The issue that I'm passionate about, autonomy. This notion, I'll go back to some of our parenting of how do we translate our perspectives through middle age into younger humans on this planet that are seeing it for the first time. It's creation versus consumption. Our curiosity to see what we can create. And I don't mean to get into this week's version of dad chat here, but the ability to consume media or content is so untethered because we have, movie theaters in our pockets. And one of the things that, again, let's always refer back to the 9-year-old self. It is the purest form that we exist in, is the desire to create a drawing on a piece of paper. And whatever that may be, that could be, video content, that could be things that are related to your craft or not. But it is going to keep you young. And it's going to keep you engaged and vulnerable to criticism and improvement and all the wonderful things that come with taking a stand. When I look at my design education, it wasn't that they taught me any tools. Because early 2001 Adobe Illustrator or Macromedia, Dreamweaver, these are all tools that have fallen by the wayside. But it was the ability to stand up in front of my work and take some hits and to take criticism and to be addressed with why did you make these decisions. And I think that was the best part of my education, was I started to define a identity for myself through that process. And that only comes through creation. That only comes through being able to put something up on the gator board with pins. And so I want to always continue that, whether it be through teaching, whether it be through parenting, is that curiosity and desire to create things on their own. That keeps me going.
Okay, I wrote down creativity, creation, curiosity over consumption, and entertainment. But I mean, entertainment can be good too, but I meant it more from a kind of superficial level as I was listening to you and kind of building on that contrast. So I think that's a great way to describe what you care about. And I want to know, now that, people have been listening to us for quite some time, for those that are interested in learning even more about your work and connecting with you, how can they reach out?
Yeah, I live in the East Bay, so if you hear this, I work out of the Ferry Building in San Francisco, and you are in the Bay Area, I would love to buy you a coffee and meet with you. If you are not here, but will be coming to town for the Figma conference in early May, I would love to buy you a robo-taxi. But if neither of those are applicable, you can find me at Gauge, GAUGE.io, and then of course all of the social networks one could possibly choose. And I'd love to find out more about you and what you're going through on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Nick. This conversation was refreshing, designful, and valuable. And I want to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on the Product People podcast.
El Salwe, thanks for taking a chance on me. Good luck, Product People. I'll see you on the internet.
I want to express my gratitude to all our listeners. Your support means the world to me. If you found today's episode valuable, please hit subscribe, leave a review, or share this podcast with your friends. I also encourage you to share your feedback and your ideas on what topics you'd like to hear about next on this podcast. Your input is very important as it helps me learn and improve. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and until next time, stay courageous, creative, and compassionate. Take care.